You also had a couple of 0 days this past month that you picked out. Is that correct, Aaron?
Yeah. So off the back of another thing from CISA, CISA has a known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. And again, CISA's recommendations are basically geared towards the US federal government, right? They're what they call the Federal Civilian Executive Branch. But that list, like a lot of the other guidance they produce, isn't just relevant to US federal government. It's worth paying attention to wherever you are. They maintain this active list of things that they know are being exploited. There's an argument to say that by the time it ends up on that list, it might already be too late, but it's better than nothing. And last month, they added 3 vulnerabilities to that list, and 2 of those were the Microsoft Exchange 0 days that made a ton of news. Proxy not shell, it's basically 2 different CVEs, along with an Atlassian Bitbucket vulnerability. So, I mean, Exchange was in the news a lot, right, in the last month. If we go back a little bit further, Proxy Shell was discovered by a researcher called Orange Psy. They are well worth watching, and maybe we can put a link to their Twitter account in the description for this. They discovered Proxy Logon, Proxy Oracle, Proxy Shell, and Proxy Relay. Those are all patched in Microsoft Exchange. But as you can probably tell, Proxy Not Shell from the last month is quite closely related to Proxy Shell. And what I thought was interesting was that Orange Psy actually predicted that Proxy Not Shell would probably exist and be found in the future at the point that he found Proxy Shell. And it turned out that cut to about 6 months later or so, and he was right.
Do you know if there's evidence of wide exploitation of this one, or is this one a little bit more academic at this point, as it was found by a researcher?
Proxy Not Shell widely exploited, and it exploded very quickly. It does require some, let's go with suboptimal configuration, perhaps, to exist. And it is authenticated, not unauthenticated. But still, if someone has popped credentials, for example, which, again, breach lists, right? There's hundreds of gigabytes of credentials floating around out there for pay, and can get into Exchange, they could elevate themselves to the highest level of privileges.
Sorry, I was going to say what makes some of these things scary, I think, especially is the reach of some of these, softwares like Exchange. It is, widely used around the world, affecting some of the largest, most critical organizations, governments. So it's really something to be worried about.
For a lot of people, the alternative is to use Exchange somewhere else, right? A lot of people are using Microsoft 365 instead of hosting their own, but it's still Exchange. Different issue with Microsoft Mail hosted. I was reading about recently was to do with I think what they call it, Outlook message encryption, and a kind of weakness that actually Microsoft aren't going to resolve. They don't see it as being a big enough issue. So very different to what we're talking about now. But the point I wanted to get across was that obviously once you start consuming it as a service, there's nothing you can do to patch. Clearly cloud type SaaS infrastructures generally have the kind of size and manpower, or person power, I should say, to kind of patch that adequately. But ultimately, you're at the whim of the provider. The provider decides not to patch something. You don't really have a choice apart from to take everything elsewhere.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, that I think a good number of the vulnerable Exchange servers, at least this is what I'd seen reported, appear to be Exchange servers left running where companies have migrated to O365, right? And they've maybe lost sight or track of the infrastructure they had in-house. We'll keep it knocking around. It's, in case we ever have to come back or ever have to in-house something, or it's running some specific service that couldn't go to O365. And then they get forgotten about or not patched. And patching Exchange is probably one of the harder Microsoft products to actually patch. Something worth mentioning, I think, about Proxy Not Shell and just in general for the future, in one of the recent feature updates for Exchange, I want to say this was the August CU, Microsoft introduced a sort of automatic remediation service that you can turn on in Exchange. And if you had that turned on, then at the point that proxy not shell was discovered as a 0-day, or at least as soon as possible afterwards, they would automatically push rewrite rules into your Exchange, into your locally hosted Exchange, to mitigate that attack. Now, to be clear, they did have to change that mitigation 3 or 4 times probably after it was released. And, that's not a great look, but it happens to all of us. These things evolve and aren't completely understood because everybody is throwing everything at getting this thing mitigated as fast as possible. But if you have the automatic updates turned on, you get those rewrites as soon as Microsoft have pivoted and fixed the next variant.
Well, for those of us that don't have those on, however, I think we probably at F5 have 1 billion customers that defend their Exchange platforms with Big IP and some other F5 gear. But what do you know? Is there an iRule that would be able to help with this at this point, or something like AWAF if this is an API-based call, that kind of thing?
So we do actually have some ASM signatures, which are available in Advanced WAF and Nginx App Protect and F5 Distributed Cloud WAF for proxy not shell. And yes, it's worth pointing out that when big impactful CVEs like this happen, if they are delivered via HTTP, HTTPS, we do have a security research team who try and jump on those and get either new signatures out or make sure that there are existing signatures that catch them. To use an example from literally a couple of days ago, straying outside of the month for this month in security, but Apache Commons Text had a critical vulnerability fixed and disclosed, which looks a lot like Log4Shell, the Log4j problem, in a similar area. And when that was disclosed, we took a look, the guys in Tel Aviv took a look, and that was mitigated at day 0 by signatures that were created in the wake of the Log4Shell vulnerability. So if you kept your signatures up to date in Advanced WAF or Nginx App Protect, or if you're using F5 Distributed Cloud WAF, you were already protected from that when it came out.